for daycare in C at Alouette Search Services in New Westminster.
Good evening. Ambassadors are supposed to be diplomats and diplomatic. I've got an ambassador here tonight who hasn't been very diplomatic recently about Canada. But first, here's Ted with a rundown.
Who pays for daycare in BC? At Alouette Search Services in New Westminster, it's the parents and the boss. They've hit on a solution that satisfies everyone and doesn't cost the taxpayers a penny. Webster lets you see it. The NDP is calling for the resignation of Federal Health Minister Jake Epp. He's been quoted as saying parents should take care of their own children instead of relying on government-funded daycare. New Democratic Party MP Margaret Mitchell says Epp is inept and should be replaced by a woman. She's coming up with Webster. But first, Canada should look at its own backyard and the way we treat our native people before criticizing South Africa. That's one parting shot from Babb, South Africa's ambassador to Canada, who is now going home. He's up first with Webster.
You came to Canada in September 1985 or thereabouts, Mr. Babb?
August 85.
August 1985. It seems that when you leave, instead of the hostility you have faced up to now, you might get a welcoming crew to wave you a happy farewell after what you said about Canada and Canadians.
Very much. This has been made into something which it isn't. My remarks in Influence were prompted by what the Canadian ambassador had to say in South Africa about South Africa.
Let's start again, though. You wrote certain things and you accused us of being really backwards, wiping out the boycotts, for instance, which was 1829, that we've treated our Indians abominable. Now, that is not the words of a diplomatic ambassador, is it?
They are. They're a perfectly valid remark upon a situation which exists within this nation. And when the Canadian ambassador said that blacks in South Africa on every single level are worse off than whites, I asked myself, where does he get to that? There are millionaires, there are legislators, there are magistrates, there are engineers.
Black
They're
ones?
not, of course they are.
Not very many.
A great number and growing. And growing. Millionaires and people who have got into the middle classes and have upward mobility. I do not see the same thing here in Canada.
Mr. Babb, with all due deference, respect and humility, our Indians have the vote, one-on-one. Our Indians now in the new constitution have existing rights guaranteed. Our Indians have access to all levels of education. We have no apartheid. Surely you can't compare our domestic situation in any way, shape, and form with what I'm told is the terror in South Africa.
I would advise you to read the parliamentary report on the self-determination of the native peoples in Canada. You will find there that in every single sense, the Indian suffers disadvantages which are not cured by the vote.
But we're on the way.
They're cured by sociology.
Are we not on the way?
I hope that that is the case.
Are you
and so
on the
are
way?
we, indeed. As I say, the upward mobility is something quite extraordinary to see. Since last we spoke with one another, in the last year, there has been more change in South Africa than has taken place in the last 50.
And you'd be the first to agree, as Ted Scott told me, the Archbishop, who was one of the eminent persons group, too little, too late. If you'd acted 20 years ago.
There's never too late. When it's a question of survival, what we were asked for by the EPG was a leap into the dark. A leap into the dark because what was thrown at the situation in South Africa is the one-man, one-vote formula, and we have looked north of the grey-green, greasy Limpopo, and we see, unfortunately, there not one single example in Africa that we could willingly follow.
You're saying that, and you must agree with Don Blencorn, that Tory MP that we have, who says blacks fighting for equality in South Africa lack the sophistication to make the democratic system work. In other words, you will tell me the blacks cannot be given, for the next 50 years, one man, one vote.
That is not what I'm saying, and I do not ever say that the black man is less sophisticated. Quite the contrary.
But Glenn,
these are people who have got to a position where we are Zulus, Xhosas, Venda, Tswana, Sotho, who are a mosaic of people within one nation. And that mosaic has to live together. And because there is a regional and ethnic imperative in every one of them, they need to see that they are not dominated by another group. A Zulu doesn't want to be ruled by a Xhosa, a white doesn't want to be ruled by the Zulus.
Well, you've no answer then. If you're not going to make progress whereby people can get one vote for one man in a democratic country, you're bound always to have a racist society.
No, you need to go through a process of power sharing. And one of the solutions that has been proposed is a canton system, another is a consociational model, and there is, of course, the confederation and federal system. And that gives rights to people within their group identity. And the cohesion of peoples is very important to create that dynamics. Dynamics of movement forward.
These sound like wonderfully diplomatic words for me. On the ground in South Africa now, you will not release Mandela. The ANC will not totally renounce violence. You've got God knows how many thousand blacks in detention, with or without charges. You really are still in a highly, almost totalitarian state.
Well, you cannot say that. That's a gross exaggeration. Our press is still a vigorous opposition press. We still have a situation where in South Africa we have gone through a process of social upheaval, and that has calmed down only because emergency steps have been taken.
Yes, and of course your press is not free as such.
Well, I would like
lots of white spaces and lots of don't cover this, don't cover that, get these cameras away.
The only place where it has been taken away is in the unrest situation where it concerns security. Now, if the press had been so kind as they were in Miami or in Watts County, where they voluntarily withdrew from the situation so as not to exacerbate it, they would not have brought this down on their own heads. And they used it for sensationalism, which is something which one cannot say is a responsible type of journalism.
To be sad, though, with the whole civilized world still totally against you, you're now really in a little conclave of your own, and one day soon you're going to explode.
Well, perhaps the West has taken the wrong tack. And this is something that I've warned about ever since I've been here in Canada, that by cutting the umbilical cord with South Africa, you chase South Africa into other camps. And I don't want my children or my children's children to grow up in a tyranny, whether it be of the right or of the left. If you'd given us a bit of help, if there had been carrot and not stick, they might have got to a position where we were much better off now. And that means also an economic carrot, not just a political carrot.
But you are absolutely controlled by the right wing of the Botha government. In fact, you feared the coup not so long ago.
Oh, not true.
But you have a body of strong men who will not give the black an inch if they have the power to keep
There is indeed a fringe of people, but
Right.
they never count for more than 15%. And if people like Alan Paton can speak about Botha as being a reformist in the true liberal sense of the word, then I think that we have got a tremendous way down the road.
What about relations with Canada? Do we do much business with you nowadays? Does that sulfur I see in Vancouver Port still go to South Africa?
Yes, and it makes fertilizer not just for South Africa, but for the whole region. And that's an important export from you, $82 million worth from Alberta alone. And we do a lot of business in terms of
Why do you take it
machinery
from
and
us
so on.
when we're so horrible to you diplomatically? And
Well-
Joe Clark and Mulroney, of course, are against you in the main.
You speak about diplomatic terms. It has been my task since I have been here to maintain open the channels of communication. And I think that that has been achieved. There has been a completely restrained attitude by the South African government to all of the provocation and assaults which the Canadian government has exercised against my government.
But, you know, even Tutu has threatened violence if all else fails, and I've interviewed Buthelezi. Buthelezi is against apartheid, regarded as a sheer puppet of your government, and that you create the fights between the black groups. And most North Americans believe that. Even the US Congress believes
Purely
that.
naive to believe that there is not tribalism within Africa. And in fact, it has been the curse of the whole African problem since the time of independence, because Africa was carved up between 260 major ethnic groups without any cognizance being taken of those frontiers passing right through them. The same with South Africa. And what was apartheid if it wasn't just partition of South Africa into 12 different republics? 12 different republics which would have their own independence. 4 of them have already done so.
So you see no hope for a peaceful solution in your troubled country?
Of course, I am extremely optimistic. At last we are seeing an upswing in our economy. Although it's only 3%, we need 4.5% just to accommodate the new arrivals on the job market. And just let me tell you...
Where do they come from? Mozambique?
Indeed, we have 1.2 million foreign black illegal immigrants in South Africa. That means that we should have got the Nansen Prize for refugees rather than Canada. Here we have a position where there is a 3% growth rate of the black population. Whatever the cover of the government, whatever its stripe, whatever its orientation, it would have to build one school for 1,000 pupils every single working day of the year. It would have to build 3 million to 6 million houses before the end of the century. It would have to provide 250,000 new jobs for the new arrivals on the market every year. That's some task, and you aren't giving us much help.
By the way, was it you that put the seed in Van der Zam's mind about the houses for South Africa?
I have made no declaration about that. That is something which I leave to the Premier of BC.
He dropped in the soup over it with Joe Clark and the federal government because he can't change our federal trade policies.
The warp and woof of trade must continue. It is part of the civilizing process. And part of the sanctions packet is not prevention of exports by Canada to South Africa. In this past year, we are the only country which has had our tourism office closed, the airlines office closed, civil servants have been prevented from speaking to South African civil servants. The only embassy which Canada has abroad which refuses to issue visas to the local population is in South Africa. Not even in Bulgaria does that take place. Here we have a situation which means that 38% of our trade has been cut by administrative fiat. And it means that there is...
Canadian trade or world trade?
Between us and Canada. And there is harassment of anybody who tries to place new investment in South Africa at a time when we need investment desperately, not just for us, but for the whole region.
Did you tell me that your civil servants in the South African embassy can't speak to Canadian civil servants?
No, as far as the diplomats are concerned, that's a different matter. But when it comes to long haulage, for instance, our railway men came here to give talks about heavy haulage, experts, and the Canadian delegation had to leave the hall.
But doesn't that make you feel that maybe you are totally wrong and have been wrong since the beginning and that your faults go way back to...
Oh, everybody can see that this is selective treatment of one particular nation. Everybody can see that South Africa is doing its utmost to improve. Everybody can see that there are 70, 80 other nations in the world which are continuing to violate human rights and have no intention of changing.
But surely, I mean, you're sophisticated and intelligent enough to bring Mandela out, let him appear on television, negotiate with the ANC.
He is keeping himself in prison. He will refuse to renounce violence. He has been given that option to leave prison if he renounces violence, and he has refused to do so.
Isn't it time you were big enough to say, come out, even if you haven't, and we'll watch you?
And then if you have to put him back, what sort of position do you place yourself into? There is a dilemma here of some proportions. And when you talk about the African National Congress, who talks about it in terms of its feudal attachment to Moscow? Who talks about it in its terms of the very, very powerful way in which violence is given?
Don't give me the commie line.
All right, let's take the 30 members of the ANC's National Executive Council. 19 of them are known to be communists. Mrs. Winnie Mandela said, "We will liberate this country with our matches and with our necklaces," and she said, "I am happy to stretch out my hand in solidarity to the people of the Soviet Union." Then we have Mr. Joe Slovo, who is a Lithuanian, a KGB colonel, somebody who is at the head of the military wing of the African National Congress. Have a look at that. And then you say, how many Pol Pots, how many Allendes, how many Castros
You leave
do we need?
You leave me with it that your mind, and perhaps your government mind, is completely determined that if one day it must explode and you'll have to fight for survival
Quite
of
the
the
contrary.
white.
The South African government has said the ANC is welcome to take part in talks. It must renounce violence. And I think that is a perfectly valid request.
We'll see how the callers treat you tonight, eh? After the break. I was fascinated with a man like you, the ambassador from South Africa, as to what the tenor will be of the calls. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster and Mr. Babb. I don't happen to agree with the policies of South Africa, but I must say that I'm extremely embarrassed when Mr. Babb goes to talk in a free country like Canada, and there are massive demonstrations and pressure for the group involved to not have Mr. Babb talk. I find that very disturbing.
Thank you, and I think you would thank him too, would you not?
Indeed, I would, yes.
It's only happened once.
Indeed. In fact, Canadians are fair-minded people. I have been listened to wherever I've gone.
You've had some rough receptions here and there, have you not? Go ahead from Smithers, BC.
Good evening, Mr. Babb. I'm very happy to talk to you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm South African and I'm behind you all the way. I think it's about time that Canada and USA was made fully aware of what is happening in South Africa. And maybe that little manual from Ada Parker that you sent me not so long ago showing photographs of the ANC and their top people having dinner with the Russians, with Russian flags behind them, etc. I think that should be shown all over. Also, I feel myself that it's time these people who spread these slanderous reports were prosecuted. I listened to Ambassador Ellis to the United Nations and to the Journal the other night. Well, that was a vitriolic and untrue attack, and I'm highly annoyed about it.
Thank you, ma'am. What's she talking about in the Journal?
Well, you know that I've got records that go back to 1958, and that's as far as back as they do go. And since that time, not one single Canadian minister has visited South Africa while he's been in cabinet. The present foreign minister hasn't, nor has the prime minister. So we're talking in terms of a vacuum about relations between our two countries.
Mr. Mulroney's going to be in Africa momentarily after he's in Italy, is he not?
He'll be in Africa.
Where's he going?
Zimbabwe, Zambia, Senegal, and
he will
Botswana.
see there the progress made towards democracy by these previous colonial countries.
He will definitely see the process of turning towards a one-party state as is happening in Zimbabwe at this moment.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Babb. I don't think that people such as yourself are much different, if any, than the Nazis were. I'd like to see our government pull the diplomatic staff out of South Africa and put them in Nicaragua, and I'd like to know why you have diplomatic staff actually based in the United States when you think about the fact that space research was on the Canadian-U.S. border a few years ago and in contravention of a UN arms embargo.
Never mind, you've lost me on that, but you made the basic point that he wants you to pack up your bags and take your embassy with you. That was his point.
Well, there are many people in the Canadian Labour Committee that say exactly the same thing, but what is important is that diplomacy is a part of the civilizing process. And if you lose contact, how on earth is the world going to maintain itself in a civilizing fashion?
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, and I have to agree with Mr. Babb on, again, sanctions. I think myself that we should not have sanctions against South Africa. If you can go in the liquor store and buy a bottle of Russian vodka, who to me are worse than the Nazis, and who would take us over in 2 seconds flat before the South Africans are our best allies in Africa, I believe they are, and they always will be, and I just think it's out of control right now.
Well, there is undoubtedly a selectivity which has been rushed into an emotional mode which nobody can break out of.
It's because better was expected of you.
Well, if you can say better is expected of us, what better is expected of the rest of the world? You can't even care what happens in the rest of Africa. What investigative journalist actually said that in Ethiopia there were 600,000 people moved from their homes? That is why they were starving. Not one. They found it out afterwards.
Go ahead from Armstrong, BC.
Good evening, Mr. Babb. I'd like to congratulate you on the way you've handled yourself during a very, very difficult time in this country.
Thank you.
I support South Africa all the way, and I'm afraid that you're going to find the majority of people do. We don't absolutely agree with apartheid by any means. But why are people trying to flood into the country? Why have so many people come in from Mozambique if it's such a wonderful country? Why are they trying to get in from Zimbabwe? I served alongside of the 6th South African Division when we went through the Hitler line, and I wish you guys all the luck in the world.
So we have been allies with Canada since the First World War, and it does seem strange that we should be treated in this fashion.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Babb, well, I'm not a proponent of apartheid. I try to understand the reasons for it. When you look at some other African countries, namely Zimbabwe and Uganda, what has happened to them when the Nationals took over, I believe that the whites in South Africa are fighting for their very existence. And I believe that Canada is wrong in the stand that they are taking. I believe the world, that when they're against South Africa, are wrong. And especially the news media. They're right-wing.
No.
Their liberal policies are trying to promote communism of the whole world.
Okay, let me ask you a question on that. Do you normally get such a favorable response?
It has definitely been a sobering experience to see over this past year how a bit of information has made people change their minds about the complexity of the South African situation.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Babb. There are two sides to this story, and as you can hear from my accent, I know a little bit of what I'm talking about. On the one hand, the world is kicking South Africa around like a political football and pushing the Winnie Mandelas and the Nelson Mandelas of the world into the communist bloc. But on the other hand, I lived there for 23 years, although I was never a South African. Maar ek is heeltemal tweetalig. But I'll tell you this, the basic problem is that the white man in South Africa always treats today, and I guess always will treat the black man no better than dirt. And you know that everything that the government is saying about we're going forward and going to make things better is all cosmetic because the world is kicking South Africa around like a political football.
This is pure nonsense. If you were to examine exactly what the government does in terms of health services, housing, in terms of training and education, you couldn't say something like that. It's the highest median income in the whole of Africa. There are more professional women in South Africa, professional black women, than in the rest of Africa put together. Do you think that this is from lack of compassion that this takes place? Quite the contrary. The number of people that go out as extension officers to help with farming, the people who go out as health officers to help with the welfare, the people who go out as teachers into the bush, these are people who do something for their fellow black citizens in South Africa, whites who go out in every direction in order to help South Africans. We have got more people at school in South Africa than in the rest of Africa put together.
Of course, you still got the Registration Act, the Group Area Act, the Homeland Pattern Act, and ban on education in some areas. Is that not correct?
That's not true at all. The whole pattern of discrimination has disappeared over the past year.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to just say that we are not in South Africa, so we don't recognize the full complexities of their situation. I know that when I've read about Rhodesia in the past, there were a number of tribes involved in their takeover, their coup of the white governments there. I'd like to know how many tribes are involved in the African National Congress right now.
Well, the African National Congress is dominated by the Xhosa. But in South Africa itself, there are 10 major ethnic groups, Xhosa, the Sotho, the Swazi, the Ndebele, the Venda, the Tswana, etc., etc. But there is not one single group which is in the majority. The Zulus are the most numerous, with 6 million.
Do they give each other equality amongst themselves?
No, there is still there is an inherent historical animosity which still exists. One sees it on the mines, for instance, that Sotho and Xhosa will fight with one another over a weekend, that the Zulu and the Xhosa are at one another's throats with the Pondo. So this is something which has to come forth throughout the whole of Africa. It is, in fact, the curse of Africa, and is one that should be channeled. It should be channeled. The problem is that we're talking in terms of an abstract nation building between peoples who have different customs and different languages. Our government broadcasts in 12 different languages to South Africa.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Babb.
Yep.
I've got to congratulate you. And furthermore, if every country would keep their nose out of your politics and attend to their own, I think we'd all be better off because you know firsthand what's going on there, and we only get what the media tells us, which isn't always truth.
Oh, it's not that bad.
Yes, it is.
Well, there is certainly a concentration on the wounds rather than the working body. And the working body of it,
Was ever thus.
the New York Times talks about unsinkable South Africa. Have they only just realized that we're not teetering on the brink? Did it take them a whole 2 years to find that out? It's like an old B movie playing over and over again.
Weren't you devastated when the U.S. Congress turned against you?
Well, the U.S. Congress was just applying sanctions as a protection method against its own imports into its own nation. Think of it that way in a cynical sense. Was not sanctions by Canada perhaps a means of promoting maple leaf sales? Were Australian sanctions not a way of promoting their own agricultural products and coal? In 100 years' time, perhaps we could look back at it and see, well, perhaps there's an underlying element of that.
Are you on a specially shortened term? You just came in August 85 and you're leaving already.
No, not at all. I've been promoted to a position which I am looking forward to being able to take up.
In South Africa?
Indeed.
My thanks to Glenn Babb, South Africa's ambassador to Canada. And it's a long while since we shot the last Biotuck. And it's not that long since you had shooting in South Africa.
Well, that is something which we all decry. But it is something which is propagated and promulgated by people who would wish us no good. And since it is between black and black that most of this takes place, I think we need a bit of compassion to see how we can sort out a problem in which all of us are on the same continuum.
I hope you settle it one day before I'm away to that great broadcasting studio in the sky. I'll be back after the break. Jake Epp made a few enemies the other day when he came out with some perfectly normal, ordinary, I should say, motherhood statements. The best people to raise their own children are the parents, not daycare. And it's quite obvious that, well, it would cost about $11 billion, I'm told, to put in universal daycare in Canada, that the Tory government, unless they're going to build a Tory government, is not going to go for that. Now, what's the score on daycare now? And the NDP, of course, is committed to universal 24-hour daycare at public expense.
No, that's not quite true. What is the score on daycare right now? Well, I think, as you probably know, having heard last week, I believe, from some of the people in BC, that it really is in crisis, Jack. There's no question about that. We have about 89% of the children who need care that aren't in licensed care. Only about 11% of the kids who need daycare, whose parents are working, are able to get into licensed care. And the fees are far beyond what most parents, average parents, can afford. The subsidies and the tax deductions are quite inadequate. And really, what's happening is it's the caregivers, the daycare workers, that are subsidizing the whole system, and they have atrocious wages.
I know, but where does the money come from?
Where's the money come from?
Well, how can you finance? At the moment, we've got, it says here, that 1/5 of school children to 12 years are left alone to fend for themselves part of the day, and that 6 out of 10 women with children under 16 now work outside the home.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So daycare is essential, but it's a question of the licensing and the cost. What was it you said? How many are in licensed places?
There are about only 11%. There are about 2 million kids who have parents who are working. And of those, about 89% are in risky, unlicensed kind of care, or they look after themselves, or maybe brothers and sisters look after them. And about 11% are in licensed care.
In BC, there are 250,000 children who allegedly need daycare and only 17,000 licensed spaces. We'll never catch up on that,
and we're closing them every day, too. The YW had to close down a center the other day.
But that's because they couldn't run a sporadic daycare center without a steady, permanent population.
Well, and part of it is because it's unaffordable for people who need it, too. So, you know, it works both ways.
Now, we have a fairly good tax deduction system for daycare. Have we not, up to $2,000 a year?
Well, yeah, but that's not, we had a lot of complaints on our tour, the Special Committee on Child Care, because it only covers up to $2,000. The average cost for people who have a child in full daycare is up to $4,000. So it doesn't cover the amount. It only has about a 50% take-up because most parents use informal kind of care, and they don't get receipts.
Because
So it doesn't nearly help the people who are working. Of course, there are many people in between the poor and the people paying taxes that don't really pay much in the way of income tax, so it doesn't benefit them at all.
And as you say, there are many people who will look after the neighbour's baby for cash, but they don't want to give
That's
receipts,
right.
or they've got to show it on their income
That's
tax.
right, that's right.
So
And it's
therefore
not worth their while, really.
the mother is prevented from deducting that from her income under the income tax
the father.
regulations. Or the father.
Yeah, right.
I know there are single fathers. What would you do, though? How can it be coped with? What's this figure, $11 billion that the Tories are using?
That's a figure that they're using in order to scare people, in my opinion. Actually, the special committee on child care that Katie Cook headed under the Liberals came out with that figure. If every Canadian child was to be in licensed daycare by the year 2001 or something. But the daycare advocacy group has since looked at those figures, and first of all, not every child would be in daycare. And secondly, they figure their figure was about at the most about $2 billion. But that's at the very maximum. I mean, there are many steps in between that are much less costly, and of course, for some time, we would expect that parents themselves would contribute some kind of a fee.
Is Epp just an old fashioned chauvinist when he says he favours the traditional family in which the wife stays at home, marriage lasts a lifetime, and lots of relatives to help raise the kids?
Well, I think he represents probably a lot of people that came out of his tradition. You know, that's the way that was his experience. But what he's not facing up to, and as a minister responsible for policy in this area, it's unforgivable. He is not facing up to the reality of today's world. It's 60% of mothers are working. And if that second earner wasn't working, that quite a large percentage of those families would be poor. Well over 50% of them would be below the poverty line, so he'd be paying for them on social assistance. The number of single parents is increasing every year. It's up to about 11% now.
Incredible.
And you know, those women are going to be. It's ironic. He's trying to get the single parents, or at least people here in this province are trying to get the single parents off welfare, while he's trying to say that the mothers should go back in the home. So we've got two tugs that are really quite unrealistic.
That probably 50 or 60% of those women who use daycare are poor women.
Exactly.
They got no money.
Exactly. And the thing is that they work on very low wages, most of them. The minimum wages are very low, and they can't afford the child care. That's why, of course, theirs would be the kids that would be in these very risky kind of babysitting arrangements. I heard from one woman in PEI, I think it was, on our tour, who said that she'd had about 12 different babysitters for her baby during the first year of the kid's life. Now, that's a very... That child would not be nourished in the way it should be.
There are non-profit daycares and there are profit daycares.
Right.
Would you allocate any public money to the profit-making daycares?
We favor trying to develop a non-profit system or even municipal daycare. In some cases, that's the best daycare. But what we would see is that in the long range, you should be developing what we would call a non-profit system. I don't think kids should be used as businesses, and that's in effect what you're really sponsoring. And I don't think tax dollars, which are needed to go into the system, should be going towards profits.
Should only go to the poor.
No, I don't think it should go to only the poor. I think it's the in-between group that are penalized so
You
much.
get a couple of yuppies, a lawyer and an accountant, you know, with a couple of kids, they can afford their own daycare.
Well, they can perhaps, at this stage of the game, they can pay more fees,
the economic
of course.
cost. I mean, they shouldn't be subsidized, surely to goodness.
Well, I think there should be some subsidy because it's very expensive, and you know, many of us feel that this, in Scandinavian countries and many European countries, it's regarded as an essential service, just as school is. Not that every child would need it or every parent would want it.
I'm in favor.
But it should be available.
I'm in favor of motherhood, and I'm in favor of.
What about fatherhood?
Well, that's part of it, they tell me.
Yeah.
And I'm in favor of subsidies to non-profit daycare center for people who can't afford it.
Well, I think you're ignoring the reality of today's world.
Not as bad as Jake Epp, though.
No, you're much nicer than Jake.
Calls to... I've got a little story about the Alouette Daycare Centre in New Westminster. I'll use that later. I'll take calls now to Margaret Mitchell. Tell us your daycare problems after the break. You're on the parliamentary committee. When do you have to put in your report?
Well, the deadline is the 31st of March. I think perhaps it'll be out a little before that, but unfortunately it was delayed until after the budget.
Nothing in the budget this year?
No, unfortunately not. We've been pushing for it very strongly.
Will there be a unanimous report?
No, it will not.
Will there be 3 reports?
I'll give you a
hint.
I'm giving you a hint, aren't I?
You're going to write a minority report, for sure. Go ahead to Margaret Mitchell, NDP MP for Vancouver East.
Yes, I believe that the daycare should be left up to the community groups, to the community, not to the centralized federal government. The parents should be able to donate time, say half of the day or a day of the week, and they will work together with the other parents in the community to create a good daycare system, not one that is set up by someone so far away as Ottawa or the federal government where our money is going into it. It should be the community money, the community people working together.
Okay, let's ask Margaret.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd just like to correct one thing. When government money, provincial and or federal, goes into it, they don't have anything to do with setting up the daycare. I agree with you completely that the development of a daycare center should be done as close to the home as possible. And I think what you're talking about is a very good form of daycare for parents who have the time to be involved. I think you're talking about really cooperative daycare, where the parents are involved. But the problem is that so many mothers and fathers now don't have the time because they're working full time.
Go ahead, please.
Margaret, I want to applaud all of your efforts on this particular issue, and I agree with your last comment about the cooperative effort. I have a question about the training and the remuneration of daycare workers. In your study, did you take that into account? Because I find the salaries appallingly low, and they don't really attract really good people.
Yes, that's one of the main problems right across the country, particularly in the non-unionized centers, and there aren't, even in the unionized one, it's still pretty low. Most of them are pretty well at minimum wage salaries, so it means that, as someone said, it's the poor subsidizing the poor. The women who are very loving, and many of them have training in preschool work, that are working as caregivers are really burning themselves out, and they're not adequately paid at all.
There's a million people out there saying if you unionize daycare workers, as the NDP government tried to do in 1972,
there are some unionized now.
Wipe it out.
No, there are a number of good daycare
Vancouver
centers.
City Hall, SFU, UBC, all these upper-class daycare centers.
Well, not upper class. Don't you think they should be paid a decent wage? Even in the unionized centers, they're not paid enough because there's not enough funding coming in. But at least it's a little bit above the minimum wage.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Margaret, I have to say that I disagree with you that there should be funding for everybody. I know my husband and I both work and mostly always have. And, you know, you make around $50,000 a year between combined incomes. We're not eligible for the full amount of, for instance, for the child tax credit, and I don't think we should be eligible for funding or extra funding to have our children in daycare. I think that there has to be a cutoff line. I think that if you make more, you should be expected to pay more and therefore help subsidize the people who have less money. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think we need to talk about two things. We need to talk about the present and the next 20 years, let's say, in a very realistic way. And I agree with you that what we need is to have government subsidies coming in to assist in keeping the door open, to make sure you've got good equipment and you can take disabled children as well as kids who aren't disabled, and have good qualified caregivers. And then I think for the time being there has to be a sliding scale of fee of some kind so that parents pay according to their income. I would agree with that. I mean, way in the future, if we were the government, we'd like to see being able to work towards the kind of system they have in Europe. But that's a way in the future. We have to be realistic.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, we just moved down here from Edmonton, and we find the healthcare system is quite different here in the availability. We had a 3-month-old son that could have daycare, fully, subsidized daycare in Edmonton. And when we came down here, you can't even get a good daycare till child's 18 months old. I think there should be more involvement by the corporations. Like I work at a hospital, and my wife works at hospitals in the Vancouver area. And I think if they actually put in a little bit of money and with a little less government subsidy, that I'm sure the employees would be willing to pay.
So Edmonton will take them at 3 months and we don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Hold on.
Yeah, there's a real lack of infant daycare. Mind you, I think we need parental leave so that parents have a choice to be at home during that first year with their kids if possible too. That's another whole area.
Unpaid.
No, I don't think unpaid. I think we've got to extend our unemployment insurance to cover part of it anyway. But the thing is that here in British Columbia, there isn't very much in the way of infant care at all.
Does the father get paid leave too, as well as the mother?
Well, if he wants to do the parenting, I think that's fair enough. Don't you think
Paid
the father
by,
should have the opportunity
not
to be
paid
at
by
home?
his employer.
Well, if it's insurance, he's paid into it himself, hasn't he? But anyway, to get back to the Edmonton situation, one of the concerns that we have in Alberta, maybe it's outside of Edmonton, is that they do not have regulations to really cover trained caregivers. They only require that a person be 18 years old, and that's one of the things that needs some changing
Call from
in Alberta.
Castlegar. Go ahead from Castlegar, the last call.
Mrs. Mitchell, I want to thank you very much for being one of the first people to point out that the parent, usually the mother, is really being torn in two directions by being called lazy if she doesn't go out to work and being called unloving if she does choose to go out to work.
And either way, a guilt trip.
I think that the idea of giving subsidies directly to daycare centers rather than subsidizing individual people makes a lot of sense because, as the last caller or so pointed out, a lot of people really feel they can afford to pay for their daycare. What they have in common with lower-income people is the need to have care that they can have confidence in.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Staff
Now, we're going to take a break now, Margaret, and we're going to go to this little walkabout I did at the Alouette Search Centre. So we'll watch that together after the break. Well, a bright sunny morning in New Westminster, and I'm here on a special search for the Alouette Search Services Limited. Now, what's a search service? It's an organization, and this one employs about 40 people, which does all the land title searches for lawyers, bankers, real estate transactions, and for ordinary people who want to know the score. But I'm here on a special mission this morning, which makes this a different kind of office, about which I'm now about to demonstrate to you. Ah, Hildy Adelhelm.
Hi, Jack.
You're the owner of Alouette Search Services.
That's right.
But tell me right now, what's this behind you and what's this doing in an office?
Well, this is the daycare center for our employees. Mothers are working out here.
The mothers work out here. The babies are looked after in here by a nanny. How long have you been doing this?
Since 1982.
How many little toddlers will have passed through your Search Services daycare center?
Oh, I think about 15.
Can we go in and say hello?
Sure, let's do it.
This is great. This is a most unusual operation. Hello. Hi. Hello.
This is Tara.
Hello, Tara. How are you? Fine. And who is this?
This is Crystal.
Hi.
Hi, Crystal. And who is this?
This is Eva Smith.
You're the nanny here, Eva,
Yes,
are you?
I am.
And this we saw.
Christine.
Christine. So, what time do you open your service in the morning here for the children?
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock until?
5.
So, in other words, you are the nanny all through office hours for the babies. Okay, let's see what kind of facilities you have here. There's one thing here I'm very interested in from my younger days. We'll just pop over the end and you'll tell me what it is. Eva, what's this?
That's our training corner.
This is your potty training corner, is it?
Yes, it is.
Potty training corner, and you take the kids out for little strolls now and again.
Yes, we do every day.
What's the name of that little girl there?
Crystal.
Crystal, will you go into your little house and show me what you do in the little house? Crystal? Over here?
You show them your house.
Show me your house.
That's mine.
Okay, have you got any drawings in there you can give to me?
I don't.
You don't? Come on and we'll look in the house. Come on.
Here, are you going to
Terry, come on, both of you. Come and show me what's in the house. Oh, good. And you both play in that house. Okay, now let's find out about this most unusual operation in New Westminster on Agnes Street, the Alouette Search Services. Hildy, how many employees do you have in your search services?
38.
38. Would they be largely women?
2/3 of them are women.
What gave you the idea to start this, or the need to start this service? And I think you said 1982.
In 1982, we were 20 then, and 6 women were pregnant all at one time. And I really risked losing several senior people if I didn't make some kind of provision for in-office daycare.
So you added on that, or you created that, what do you call it, nursery?
It's a nursery, yeah.
Now, this must cost you quite a bit of money because you don't get any subsidies as an employer to do this kind of thing, do you?
It seems like a lot, but it's really very little. Initially, the startup costs were about $1,000 to buy equipment, and now the nanny's fee is shared by the mothers.
The nannies, you always have, so therefore the fee for the nanny will go up and down depending on how many children she's looking after, will it?
That's right, yes.
But the girls would pay. I'll ask one of the girls because some of the mothers are working here, aren't they?
Right.
Yeah.
I'd like you to meet Debbie Fair.
Hello, Debbie. Which is your little baby in there?
She's the youngest one, the 5-month-old.
5 months.
Christina.
Well, how does this operation suit you? Do you bring the baby to the office in the morning
Yes, I do.
and turn her over?
Eva comes in at 9, I get Christina all settled, and then Eva takes over and I come to my desk and do my work all day.
If you have any major crisis, you can nip in and see the baby.
Yep, right there, and I go in on my lunch break and see her,
And you pay your share of the nanny's fee yourself?
yes, I do.
Great stuff. Now, where's that other girl? Come on. Oh, how many babies have you got?
2. Well, I've got one in there now, and I have a 4-year-old daughter that I had originally had in the nursery when she was a baby.
Good. Now, here are another 2 women who are mothers of the babies in the kindergarten. Can I catch you? Oh, I can go down to you, I think, can't I? And your name? Your name is?
Suzanne.
Suzanne. Which is your baby? Come on and we'll go see your baby. Hey, we'll go see your baby. How does it work out for you?
Oh, it's great. It's really good.
Which is your baby?
That's Crystal.
Hello, Crystal. Coming over to see Mummy? Oh, she's too happy playing with the doll.
You like that doll?
So you bring her down 9 o'clock in the morning, take her home 5 o'clock at night?
Well, I start at 8:30, and we're in here about 20 after 8, and we leave here about 4. So.
And it doesn't disturb the work at all?
No, not at all.
Great stuff. Now, the third mother. Hello, mother. Your name?
Louise Porter?
Louise, and this is your little girl here?
Yes.
Tell me, how long have you worked at the search services?
I've been here about 4 years, going on 4 years.
She's how old?
She's 2.5.
2.5. So it works out very well for you?
Very good, yeah. I just bring her in to work with me and don't have to worry about her.
And if she gets into some kind of little problem, you're here?
I'm right here, that's right.
Just leave your desk for a few minutes, settle her down again, and back to work?
Back, right.
Well, what do you think other employers should do the same thing?
Yeah, I think they should be a lot more daycares in offices because of all the problems that they are having in daycares.
I think the important thing with you, Hildy, is that it gives you constancy of employees, does it not?
It certainly does. I have had no problem in retaining people that otherwise would have left. Absenteeism has gone way down. People are very rarely late. The mothers are coming to work when their children are not 100% because they know that if they're not feeling well, they can always come in and check on them.
Oh, well, that's great. And this is for me. Thank you very much indeed. And this is for me. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll put your little pictures on television, won't we? Well, Hildy, congratulations. Has anybody in the area copied you at all in this kind of operation?
Several people have called. The BC Teachers Fed, Nabob's. I know a hospital in North Vancouver's been looking into it, but as far as I know, I'm the first business to have started this.
Free enterprise business who is helping to supply good daycare service for employees while they are at work.
Right.
Thank you very much, Hildy.
Thank you, Jack.
What do you think of that, Margaret?
Well, I think it's great. I think it's a good cooperative effort, and it's good for the mothers. It's also good for the employer. She gets some benefits too, you know, in being able to retain her.
Imagine 6 pregnant at one time. If they'd all gone off, you know, on long maternity leave after the baby. You got one in the House of Commons, I believe. You're responsible for it.
Well, I fought for it in the Joe Clark government, and then we eventually got it under Jean Sauvé. Yeah.
Not for the well-paid MPs, is it?
No. Well, they could use it but they're a little bit beyond that, most of them, you know, a bit over the hill.
So it's for the employees on the Hill in the House of Commons.
It's a good quality one. It's bilingual as well.
So the next step in the battle is when we read your minority report on the Special Parliamentary Committee on Daycare, due to be handed down on when?
We don't know the exact date, but it'll be towards the end of March.
March 31. And you found enough warm-hearted Tories to sit on the committee, did you?
Well, there are a lot on the committee. Their warm-heartedness, it doesn't go always the same direction as mine, but that's all right.
Nothing new in the federal budget. My thanks to Margaret Mitchell, NDP MP for Vancouver East, all about daycare, and I'll be back after the break.